Everybody has a point of view about what's sexy and what's erotic. And it's an odd place to go to as a filmmaker, partly because it's been trespassed into so many times by so many other movies.
I think it's very erotic when you don't see that much. It was an interesting problem with Out of Sight. The way it was written was just one scene in the bar. So I cut the scene where they meet and he sits down and talks to her and they start flirting. And then the scene in the bedroom was only shot silently because it was going to have the dialogue from the first scene laid over it anyway, so it didn't work as a scene. Then we got the idea, Steven Soderbergh and I, sort of between us really, to start intercutting. We just tried one or two things and then it started to gel. Flashing back, sometimes we flash forward. I would say, let's do this and cut from here and the hands, and he'd say, let's try overlaying the dialogue here, and we just did it together, and it was really exciting. And we did this little thing of stopping the frames. It's never really a long freeze, it's just a few frames that we freeze, just heighten the sexual tension between the two of them. It tells a story, it's very emotional, it's very sexual, I think, without really showing much. Some other films I've done have shown more.
You went to see her?
Don't warn her about Chino.
So she did help you?
I don't think we should get into that.
You know, when they're undressing separately and we've got odd dialogue over the undressing, nothing to do with what they're actually doing. Yeah, I think that it's really good and very, very good storytelling.
This kind of cutting in Out of Sight and in movies like JFK represents a further break from Griffith's classic style of seamless editing.
Y'all gotta start thinking on a different level, like the CIA does.
Where editors once labored to preserve the illusion of continuous time and space, they now fracture it at will, creating new possibilities for storytelling.
Exactly what he said he was. A patsy.
Oliver Stone is a very wonderful director for an editor because he gives the editor free rein. He says to the editor, play jazz. Just go free form. There is a scene in JFK where Oswald walks from a house to a theater, and he said, just when you cut the scene, just make it very chaotic. So I cut the scene in what I thought was a chaotic way, and I showed him the next day, and he said, no, it's got to be way more chaotic than that. Since we cut JFK on a 3/4-inch linear editing system, one thing it had was the ability to hit these buttons and change where the edit went. So I sat there and just banged on the keys like this. And I showed it to him the next day, and he went, that's it. It's in the movie.
In XXX, I did have a new editing philosophy. I had been interested in cubism all my life. And one day, I was watching extreme sports videos. Somebody will do some amazing stunt, and they'll do it in reverse, and then they'll do it forward, and then they'll do it in reverse. I suddenly thought, what if I did it in so many angles that I didn't care whether you saw the beginning of a stunt from 4 different angles. And the way we would cut it, you would feel that you were going around the event in pieces, so that by the time that motorcycle lands, you actually experience the jump, almost as if you're on the motorcycle, as opposed to standing back in a safe distance, observing the event like you would in real life. This is not real life. This is really relishing this action moment by making a cubist editing approach.
Another change in editing is the accelerated pace of movies, a subject of controversy among filmmakers.
An encounter with two swords 30 years ago would have been probably done in a master shot in a couple of exchanges. Today, that encounter could evolve into 200 shots. Split-second eye blink, a blade going into a chest, slight movement of a wrist. So the audience is taken right down into this roller coaster ride of minutiae, and that's what they want.
because kids today are raised on television and in MTV and commercials, they not only can process information faster and understand what images mean, but that they demand it.
I think the MTV generation in the 80s kind of created this style of editing. And Billy Weber and I on Top Gun, we were pushed in that direction. Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simmons were very much in tune with their audiences. They felt that that was what the audiences liked, and I think they were proven right, given the box office on some of those early movies.
And I mean, fast cutting was not invented now or with MTV. Just look at Lou Lombardo's work on The Wild Bunch.
Sometimes a cutting style is effective inside of a movie to shake you up and rattle your soul, but consistently to have that style pounding away at you like a metronome on high speed for 2.5 hours is a little bit, at least for me, maybe I'm just getting old, but it's a little bit debilitating. Now, it doesn't bother my kids, because my kids were raised on 30-second commercials and on MTV and VH1, and they were raised on video games.
I feel like I was born 80 and I'm growing backwards. So now I'm somewhere around 27, you know, I get a tattoo and I'm feeling closer to a generation that has learned to absorb information at a speed that was heretofore unthinkable, and where their rhythms are well more hungry than a traditional narrative pace.
What I'm afraid of is the tendency for everything to go by quickly. And I'm afraid of what it does to the culture. A sense of consuming something and throwing it away, as opposed to being enveloped with something. Taking the time to see and experience time in a different way.
First, one understands that he causes much of his own suffering needlessly. Second, he looks for the reasons for this in his own life. To look is to have confidence in one's own ability to end the suffering. Finally, a wish arises to find a path to peace. For all beings desire happiness. All wish to find their purer selves.
Many times editing is about when not to cut, when to have the silence, when to let the moment be itself. The musicality of Places in the Heart is one of the things that is the strongest. And I don't mean the score. I mean the musicality in the way that the scenes flow together, the ambience of that rural Texas summer, hot, with the cicadas. And there's a four-square Protestant feeling. After her husband has been shot by this drunk black kid on the railroad tracks, there were no funeral parlors. You couldn't afford one anyway. In the Depression, the body was brought back to the home and laid out on the dining room table where they just had Sunday dinner. An incredibly moving moment. And we just held on her and held on her and held on her and held on her.
We would have been married 15 years this October. We had 2 children. And I never knew till just now where it's had a scar right there.
And it was just exquisite, moving, beautiful. If we had cut it, it would have destroyed everything.
Editing is like poetry. It has to do with rhythms. It has to do with visual. It's visual poetry.
The digital revolution has further enhanced the poetic powers of the editor. George Lucas, who began his career as an editor, is one of the pioneers of this new technology.
All art is technology. That's the very nature of it. The artist is always bumping against that technology. And the advent of, whether it's a new color of blue, whether it's a proscenium arch, whatever it is, it changes the way we work in that art form.
With computer technology, editors now can make changes within the frame, adding or removing elements from the original image. This increases the editor's control, but also multiplies the number of decisions to be made.
Now you can edit what I call in 3D, which is you have a scene and you have people in the scene, and you can cut those people out, you can move them around in the scene, you can go in for a close-up, you can go out. You can sort of direct the film in the editing room, which is, growing up as an editor, what I've always wanted to do.
The new technology also makes it possible to cut the movie before shooting begins. Pre-visualization gives an editor much more input in planning the movie.
And I have a system now, because of the digital world, I have a group of kids really do little videomatics of things, and we have a little blue screen. We can send these editors in and shoot scenes on just an amateur video camera. And so I can actually shoot the film and make the film and write the film right there in the editing room. Every main character in our movie has a digital counterpart. We have totally virtual actors now, and we use them quite a bit. Mostly we use them for stunts and things. And we have a lot of situations where it's better to use a digital actor than it is to use a real actor. Christopher Lee, who's 80 years old, he can't really fight the way he did in Attack of the Clones. You're not going to get an artificial intelligence computer that's neurotic enough to be able to understand how you create a performance. Performance is an art.
At the end of the day, all this stuff has to work to tell a story. And if you're not telling a story, it doesn't matter how much razzle-dazzle there is. It's not about the tools, it's about the story.
In many ways, we're the last storyteller. The movie has been written by the writer, and then it's directed, and then it comes to the last storytelling, which is in the editing process.
The last draft of the screenplay is the first cut of the movie, and the final cut of the movie is the last draft of the script.
An editor can take a sequence that a director shot and reconfigure it in such a way that it becomes a whole different sequence, which is much more beneficial to the movie.
Bob Fosse referred to me as a collaborator on his movies, and I don't think there can be a greater compliment for an editor to be called a collaborator, to really to have that function.
And now, a word about Dykes. I like Dykes.
How could you say that?
Lenny was a biographical film of the comedian Lenny Bruce, who was often arrested for taking language to the legal limits of where it could go in the late 50s. The most wonderful thing that happened in it was near the end of the production. We had to show the film to the producer. And the script for the film was the best script I ever read. But we were having a problem. We hated the ending.
They'll continue. You're trying to stop the information.
Hey, look, will you please remove this man from the courtroom?
It
was just not coming together. When Lenny is dragged out of the courtroom, his life is effectively over. Between that period and the time of his death, there were 20 minutes of material. And I turned to Bob and I said, why don't we just kill the son of a bitch? I took out 2 reels of film, and I went straight from "You Can't Stop the Information" to Lenny's body on the floor. And that was about the most exciting thing I've ever done in a cutting room. I mean, we just loved that.
The opening scene of Apocalypse is a good example of what you can achieve editorially that is not based on the original script. There were some collisions of images that occurred to Francis as he was shooting the film that were at variance with how he had planned to begin the film originally.
The trees being napalmed was originally shot for the surfing scene, which comes much later in the film.
There was a shot of jungle bursting into slow motion flames with helicopters flying at odd angles in slow motion through the frame. And when Francis saw that shot in dailies, which was, I think, simply done to record this explosion. It wasn't intended to use it in the finished film. But he looked at it and said, that's the film right there. It's jungle, flames, helicopters.